All right. Hi. So this lecture screencast is linked to lecture series number 4, centered around the project proposal document and presentation, essentially. Soon, very, very soon, we are going to get to a stage where we will be required to submit a project proposal associated with the various group topics that we're working on. And while we're still thinking about this, but very, very soon as well, you are going to be required to do proposal presentations. We're not really sure exactly how this is going to be done, but it's likely going to be remote. It should be possible. I mean, we've done it before. Sort of situation where you have different project team members do the presentation from different locations. So you don't necessarily have to be collocated for you to give a talk. You just have to properly structure it, I suppose. So something else I wanted to mention was that the group proposal assignment is available on the Moodle, right? So it's going to be open beginning this week. So you want to be, you probably want to look at this as a group and already start brainstorming on how exactly you're going to start working towards the proposal itself. I do believe it's due, I could be wrong here, but let me just check the date. It's due on the 26th, right? So that'll be 2 weeks from now. So you have really enough time for you to submit or to work towards the proposal document and the proposal presentation. So both the proposal presentation and the proposal document are actually due on the 26th. But the actual date of the proposal presentation will be announced in due course. All right, so this document is actually going to provide you with more guidelines on what's required of you. And incidentally, some aspects of what is required of you as you're working through the proposal are going to be highlighted in lecture series number 4. Great. So I just thought we would really start off by just quickly walking through the lecture series outline. We thought it would be important for us to discuss so-called research process as it relates to the so-called scientific method. To remind us really that everything we are doing is sort of like intertwined, it's connected. And most of what we just essentially going to gloss over this part of the lecture called or tagged as research process, because most of what we're going to discuss was already discussed in 2034. If you've forgotten, you probably want to go back to last year's notes or slides and do a bit of revision here. And then we immediately transition to discuss the structure of the proposal document itself. So focusing more on the key elements that are expected to appear in your proposal document. And then we'll talk a little bit more about formatting guidelines. It turns out that the documents that we are producing, or the documents that we are expected to produce, are supposed to conform to a certain set of standards. And in terms of the formatting guidelines, in our case, we've adopted the Association for Computing Machinery template, specifically the SIGCONF template, and talk a bit more about this. And then finally, we are just going to walk through a few guidelines associated with the proposal presentation itself. So both the content that is expected to be in the presentation itself, and some things to pay particular attention to as you are giving this presentation, or when the time comes for you to give the presentation. All right. So just quickly start with the research process. So it turns out, right, and you probably remember this from 2034, that the research process as it relates to the scientific methods initially starts off with an observation, right? So before you embark on any sort of research project, you almost always start off with an observation. And the observation process is normally linked to problem identification. So you you observe something, right? And then from there you hypothesize, and then you conduct a series of research activities, and then afterwards you collect data and then draw up conclusions based on the research activities that you performed, right? And so the diagram here, the screenshot here just shows you the loop that you otherwise go through, starting with observation, right, all the way up to point in time when you make predictions or something. In terms of the research activities, I'm going to focus a little bit more on literature review or literature search here, just because it's heavily linked to some of the things that are expected to be in the proposal. But I'll also talk a little bit more about some of the things that you will eventually work towards as you're wrapping up or as you get midway through the group project itself. So it turns out that one of the activities that you're going to find yourselves spending a lot of time on is this whole process of going through literature to search for prior work that has been done, right? And that's prior work related to the topic that you're working on. It turns out it's an important activity to conduct, because you always want to relate what you're doing with what has already been done. And the idea really behind a literature review or related work is to highlight major flaws or gaps that exist in existing literature, right? So let's say if you're one of those groups who's working towards, coming up with the application that is linked to, students requesting for, an assessment retest or something, or an assessment makeup. What you want to do is you want to go out there and search for work that is related to what you're doing. And the idea behind that is you want to learn a bit more about what other people have done in that particular area, be able to link it to what you're doing. But it's not enough for you to just write about what other people have done. You want to be able to critique what they've done, right? To be able to highlight fundamental differences that exist between what you're proposing to do and what already exists out there. And a reminder here that in as much as we are working through a software engineering course, but the proposal that we're working towards here is more research oriented, which is why we've incorporated some aspects of research into the course itself. All right. So some of the key tasks here really is you just go out there, you go online and you do a bit of searching. And I think there should be a slide that gives pointers on areas or places where you can search for literature really. So I won't really spend time on that. I'll talk about it once we get to the slide. But one of the things you're probably going to find yourself doing is this whole notion of forward chaining and backward chaining, right, as you're searching for literature. And the idea behind chaining really is that as you're doing your search, it's usually helpful to, once you find a piece of work that is related to what you're doing, it's usually helpful for you to learn more about what others have done. It's usually helpful for you to look at work that has cited the piece of work that you're reading at that point in time, and also to look at work that has been referenced in that piece of work, right? And you will notice that it is tremendously easy to do that if you're using platforms such as Google Scholar, for instance. So these are the academic databases that will really hyperlink different pieces of existing work. So if I was to go to experimentation in software engineering, the forward chaining process would involve me looking at work that has cited this particular book here, right? So I would click here, and then I would have a sense of who exactly has cited this piece of work, and by just really scanning through the work that has cited this particular book, I have an idea as to what sort of work has been done to build up on the ideas that exist in this piece of existing work, right? So that would be forward chaining. And then the backward chaining process would involve you going through the work that is referenced in this piece of work, and for you to gain a sense of what is actually referenced here, I think I'll go with this link because there's a PDF document here. But the idea is you go to the references section, and then you scan through the work that is referenced. So you'd be backward chaining there. Right? And this is taking a bit of time here, but I guess you probably get the point here. So forward chaining and backward chaining is going to be tremendously useful in this case. Trying to see if there is a way of finding out. Probably not. So it turns out that it might not be as intuitive or as easy in via Google Scholar for you to backward chain literature, but it turns out that if you go to places like the SCM Digital Library, for instance, because work there is, if it's just like in period, I guess, because work there is properly curated, it's just, what you will notice is, if I access this piece of work, for instance, what you will notice is that you literally you don't have to access the actual PDF document for you to look at work that has been referenced in this piece of work, right? So it becomes tremendously easy for you to backward chain in this case, because all you do is you just gain access to the section of this interface that provides a list of references, and then you can refer to these references by just clicking on these links here, right? You notice that there are hyperlinks going to Google Scholar and going to the SCM Digital Library itself. All right, so forward chaining and backward chaining, right? And then it turns out that as part of what we are doing, or as part of what you're going to be doing, the research process also includes an aspect that is heavily linked to software engineering. That's the design and implementation of the artifact, right? So you're going to go through a phase where you systematically design and develop this sort of artifact, right? And then more importantly, once you're done with the design and implementation of the artifact, what you're going to have to do is you're going to use the artifact to conduct some sort of experiments, right? So some sort of study. And the idea behind this study in this particular case is in part to try and figure out things like the relative efficacy associated with the artifact itself, or aspects such as usefulness, right? And all this will become very clear once we get to a stage where we look at what's tagged as experimentation in software engineering. If you remember the outline, there is a theme that is heavily linked to experimentation in software engineering, right? Again, something to keep in mind here is that it's not enough for you to develop the artifact, right? You always want to show people how successful that artifact is, right? You just don't build something and then you give it to people, right? You need to build that thing and be able to test it so that you can prove to people that it's better than the status quo. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. I'm trying to think of something else here. I just lost my train of thought. Okay, so there's this idea behind I guess science and engineering that normally comes up whenever artifact development is concerned here. And I would like for us to really keep this in mind, the fact that there's a fundamental difference between engineering and and science, right? As engineers, what people will do is they will study an area in order to build something, right? But when you're a scientist, what you're doing really is you're building something so that you study a phenomenon, right? At this stage, I guess we could think of ourselves as being engineers, right? Because we are studying something in order to build an artifact. Incidentally, once we get to a stage where we start 4014 next year, what we will likely be doing, at least the vast majority of us, is the opposite, right? So it will be the science part. So we develop an artifact in order to study a phenomenon, right? So just remember that there's a fundamental difference between the two. Great. So hopefully that was enough to get us started, a good enough revision on the research process as it relates to 3020. Something else I think I forgot to mention is the fact that what we'll be doing as part of this proposal writing process is what we tagged as documentation or reporting when we're looking at lecture series number 3. If you remember, we did mention that one of the key activities associated with project management is this whole notion of reporting, and the reporting typically starts at the proposal stage. Okay, so I'll pause for now, just drink some coffee, and then we'll continue off with the next part of the lecture series, right?